design list, but web design L is kind of high level. Anyway, that's, so occasionally I'll get those too. What do you mean? What's wrong with top posting? Even worse is when I call them Jeopardy style quotations. People don't get that either. Anyway. Did I skip two? No. Number one, though, is you have to be a benevolent dictator, and you have to be comfortable with this, or you at least have to accept it. If you're not, maybe comfortable is the wrong word. You have to accept it and be willing to go with it. The person who's in charge has to be in charge. They have to have the final say on what's okay and what isn't. They have to be willing to enforce that. Politely, hopefully, at least for my way of approaching things, politely is much better. But a mailing list is neither a democracy nor an anarchy, unless you want it to be that way. So as an example, where a bunch of list members forced a guy off the list, in that example, I guess it depends on how it works. But on my list, we don't have posses, basically, or lynch mobs, or whatever you want to call them. If someone's going to be removed from the list, that's my call. And in some ways, that's how it should be. If I'm on a mailing list, I don't want to have to worry about who's supposed to be there and who isn't. That's somebody else's job. On CSS Discuss, it's my job. Now, that's not. I don't want this to be taken as a mailing list should never be a democracy nor an anarchy. If you want a mailing list that's a democracy, great, go for it. But what I found on mailing lists, for whatever reason, democracies tend to lead to anarchies. Because when everyone's in charge, no one's in charge on a mailing list. Unless you have a very small core group of people who all are basically pulling in the same direction. But on a list with 6,000 people from all over the world with all these various viewpoints, there's no way that you can have basically a collective enforcement of the policies. Everyone's going to read the policies a little bit differently. Okay? Or a lot differently in some cases. Someone might decide that the policy of try not to offend people means never offend people. And if anyone ever says that you offended them, you're out. Okay? That's not going to work. It's not going to work if one of the people on the list thinks that's how it should be, and someone else on the list says, hey, as long as they're not using like certain really awful words, then they're not really trying to offend anyone, and that's, you can see the conflict there already. So, obviously, if a member becomes disruptive, then the person who's in charge has to do something about that. Place them under moderation, or if necessary, kick them off the list. I have only had to kick one person off the list for disruption reasons in the entire 3 years plus I've been running this list. And that was at the beginning of the year, as a matter of fact. In a couple of cases, I've had list members who couldn't seem to resist flaming each other. And when I put that in quotes, because a flame war on CSS Discuss on any other list would hardly even be noticed, or almost any other list. What we think of a flame war is more than 3 testy messages in a single thread. Okay, which gives you some idea of the nature of the list and how that's been shaped. But occasionally I have put people's addresses into the moderation approval queue for like a week, let's say. I put them in what's effectively a penalty box. It's you can still post, but the administrators are going to look at your post before it goes onto the list, just because you can't seem to resist, insulting people, basically, or you're not showing people respect. And actually, there's one guy I placed under moderation because he just would not stop excessively quoting. And I wrote him and I told him, look, you're in moderation now because of this. And any message that you send that I see in the moderation queue that has a ton of quoting, I'm just bouncing it back at you. He stopped posting, but On the other hand, I've seen him on other lists since, and he's not excessively quoting anymore. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, in this situation, you have to know ahead of time, in as sort of objective a way as possible, what constitutes a reason for being kicked off the list. And then you have to stick to it. if somebody who really annoys you does something that doesn't cross that line, you can't kick them just because they're annoying. And if someone you like crosses the line, they've got to go. And in general, you have to be willing to explain that decision in public. You don't necessarily have to defend it, but explain it. With the one situation at the beginning of the year, a guy named Ryan kept posting the list. Well, I say kept. He had posted the list a few times, basically saying CSS sucks. It doesn't work. It doesn't do what I want it to. I don't, this is stupid. And I had responded, on the list and also in private at least once, saying, we understand that you're frustrated. CSS can be challenging sometimes. However, this isn't helping. If you have a specific problem, post about that specific problem, and the list membership will try to help you solve that specific problem. But we're not here to talk about whether or not CSS sucks or not. Maybe it does, but that's not what this list is for. He didn't seem to want to accept that. So at the beginning of the year, he did it again, and I told him in public, I told him on the list, because it had just gotten to that point, look, here's the deal. If you can't accept that, then this probably isn't the list for you. You should leave. And his response was, no, I'm going to stay here. If you want me off your list, you can ban me yourself. I was like, done. That's it, gone. Okay? And then he subscribed under a different address, and he posted again, and I kicked that one. And then eventually I set up a regular expression to prevent anyone from his particular IP range from subscribing. At that point, he was gone. Now, did he have a point? Maybe. I could argue that with someone for a couple hours. But the point was, he was relentlessly off topic. He was effectively trolling by the standards of our community and by the standards of many communities. He was trolling, and I won't put up with that. And then so once that had happened, I posted a message to the list, because I know that with several people joining every day, there are going to be people who, the first day that they joined a list, some guy got kicked. And yikes. What kind of list is this? I thought it was a good list, and I didn't know that So I posted a message saying, here's why this happens. That's the quote I had earlier about I only asked 2 things of members. That's where that came from. And basically, and the end of it said, this had, thus my decision. If you would like to discuss it with me in more detail, please contact me off list. Okay? Because I didn't want to get into this whole thing on the list, a whole huge thread about, well, Ryan was a little abrasive, but he had a point. No, he didn't. No, we don't need that on the list. With 60 messages a day, we don't need more traffic. So that's a case of exercising authority only when it's necessary. To me, that's sort of part of the price of admission for being a benevolent dictator, is you're benevolent and you're minimal to the maximum extent possible. If you're going to be just a plain old dictator and kick people because you feel like it and all that kind of thing, okay, if that's the kind of list you want, fine, but it's not going to go nearly as smoothly. We could do a Ben Parker, with great power comes great responsibility sort of thing, but I don't know how great the power is there. It's just a mailing list, but still. Basically, what it comes down to is when you're in charge of a list like this, you can't be afraid to use that authority. You can't be afraid to say, okay, this has gotten to a point where I have to take this action, which some people might not like, but that's just how it is. And if some people, what it comes down to in the end is, this is a mailing list. No one is ever forced to join, and no one is ever forced to stay. And hopefully, almost no one is ever forced to leave. Until the beginning of the year, I could have said that no one was ever forced to leave. Now I can't quite say that. But that's what it has to come down to. Because hopefully, what people can realize is that having a useful list is not a right. It's a privilege. And it turns out it takes a lot of work to preserve that. Now, when that work gets to be too much, I call this one community interest attacks, just because, ooh, that was cool. I could do the whole rest of the thing like this. Ooh. Anyway, when community interest attacks. Like I said at the beginning, if you told me that within a week of launching the list there'd be 1,000 people subscribed, I said you were nuts. I was able to run this as the sole list chaperone until the end of last year, which is when I got around to appointing moderators. But basically, you have to look at what you're doing from time to time and how your involvement level is. Are you staying on top of the administrative chores? Things like dealing with unrecognized bounces. Looking to see if there are any accounts that have been inactive for too long. Are you still involved in the list? Are you still setting a good example? Because you could have the first two covered okay, but covering the first two has you so stressed that you're not meeting number 3. You're not setting the example that you want on the list because you're just so stressed out. Is always a possibility. When you get to that point, and this was hard for me because I have problems delegating authority, but I did consider moderators or co-administrators. In my case, I'm still the list administrator. I'm still in charge of kicking people off if they need to be kicked off, which, as I say, happened once. I'm in charge of dealing with subscription problems and all that sort of thing. The moderators are there more to handle numbers 2 and 3. They're involved in the list, and I am able to stay involved in the list a little bit more now. But I also know that they're watching the list, and they can say, hey, this is off topic, or those sorts of things. They can send those direct reminders about, hey, you're excessively quoting, that sort of thing. And they can set a good example. This has been incredibly useful. I was getting to the point where I was really worried about the community, the nature of the community, and the fact that it was starting to degrade because I couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep on top of it. The moderators have helped immensely. And of course, if you've gotten to the point that you just don't care, it's time to think about handing the reins over to someone else. And maybe still stay involved in the list, but don't be the administrator anymore if that's what it comes to. That will be another hard one when I eventually reach that decision. But it will happen eventually. Now, I may also at some point, these moderators may become co-administrators so that they can help with all 3, but we're not there yet. Or I'm not there yet, excuse me. Someone else might have been there already, but I'm not there yet. The other nice thing about having moderators in this situation is that if they see something that they think I might want to comment on in my administrative capacity on the list, they can bring it to my attention, even if I didn't see it. That really seems to help a lot. But in the end, it all comes back to there's one person in charge, and maybe eventually there will be 5 people in charge. But one of the reasons I haven't done that yet is that on lists that I've been on where it went from one person being in charge to a small committee being in charge, that just never seems to go well. Because the committee members generally all act as administrators, which is great, except when they disagree. And then it's kind of one of those, Mommy said one thing and Daddy said another, and now I'm all confused. Not trying to, I'm sorry, that probably seemed like I was being patronizing towards list members, which is not the case. I mean, when you have someone who has authority figures and the authority figures disagree right there, it's very confusing. And it gets even better when they start arguing in public, or worse, actually. But so that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this the way I'm doing it. It still all ends up with me having to make the decisions, which you could phrase that as, I'm still the god. But when you get right down to it, I don't necessarily want to be. I just am because I created this list, so it's my responsibility until I hand it off to someone else. And I created the list because there wasn't a list like it, and I thought that maybe there would be some people out there who would be interested in it. As it turns out, there were. So, in summary, because I'll have to get off the podium before 11 o'clock, embrace benevolent dictatorship if you're going to be in charge of a list. And again, that That sounds like it means you must rule with iron fist. Well, put a velvet glove on the iron.